right, welcome to the Contractor Show. Today I want to come to you and I want to talk about what it's like to establish a brand in the construction industry. As many know that are in the construction industry, it's a fierce market, and it's so critical for us to get crystal clear on our brand. And I don't want to mistake marketing from branding because they are two separate deals. They are two separate approaches when it comes to branding and marketing. But what I want to talk about today is truly branding yourself in the construction industry. So a little bit about myself and how we've been able to strategize and come up with our brand in the industry has really been based on our core values in the company. We talk about integrity. We talk about being authentic, having personal responsibility in our decisions. And so once we become crystal clear on who we are, I believe that's the foundation of what sets up your brand as a company. No matter what your beliefs are, no matter what your core values are, ultimately that's where the foundation is built on branding your company. So as Latson Construction, we are built on our core values. And the number one core value that sticks out to me is truly being authentic in what we do. We're authentic in the ways that we hire. We're authentic in the ways that we communicate. We're authentic in the ways that we treat people and how we want to be treated. And ultimately, that's allowed the foundation for us to be built. So it's not just here locally. We have been able to establish this massive vision throughout the entire state of Florida. And ultimately, that strategy has been taking our core values and aligning them with similar clients. And it's, Florida's a big area, but ultimately we have to take a step back and look at where do we want to be in the next 3, 5 years, 10 years. Well, I'm looking further than that. I'm looking, where do I want to be in the next 20, 30, 50 years? I don't want to be doing this forever. I want to hand this legacy on to someone and allow Latson to continue to go, but it has to be based on the values and foundation that we built from day one.
Mm-hmm. So what is the first step? You have a guy, all right, you've been in the construction industry for, let's say 5, 10 years. You're realizing, okay, I'm getting established with this company, but I really want to go off and do my own thing.
Yep.
What is that first step looking like? Do you need capital to get started? Do you think you can just go, from the very bottom and just work your way to the top? How does it work with the connections?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what is saying when if I'm saying I want to start my own contracting company, what is the next step after that?
Well, you don't need money to get started. I didn't have money until I got started. As a matter of fact, the first ever time I took on debt as a company was when I purchased our first building, which was this year, and I'm almost 4 years into it. So you don't need money to get started. I think that's a misconception when it comes to people starting businesses, is that, there's a sense of fear, and it's the fear of the unknown of what could happen. It's a fear of failure, but you don't need money to get started. Does it help? Yes, it helps. But the first thing that has to be done if someone's looking to branch out and start their own company in the construction world is that you have to know your relationships. You have to establish those relationships. And too many people get out there and they don't stay true to themselves. They try to compete with too many people in the market, and ultimately it sets you up for failure. Once you become truly, I would say, acceptable of where you are, that can be a very dangerous situation. Dangerous in a way that you can be unstoppable. Once you get enough confidence in who you are and what you're able to do, and truly the brand that you want to establish, you start to attract others. And I have a deep belief that once you attract others with the similar values and the similar beliefs, some magical things can happen when you're starting to brand your company.
Okay, so you don't need. Yes, I mean that's definitely really good to hear that. You don't necessarily need $100,000 to get started.
And let me add to that, because when I started, I left a career that was paying me $150,000 a year. It was a very comfortable career. I had a long ways to go, and so when I left that to, let's call it cold turkey, because that's what it is, it was probably the most fearful time of my life, thinking that I made a mistake, and I went from, let's call it a window office and pretty much traveling the country for multi-million-dollar projects to now working in my 10 by 10 home office with IKEA furniture and our home printer. That's how I started. Saturday mornings with my daughter on my lap. So you don't need that money to get started. Does it help? It does. Could it advance? Possibly. But I ultimately feel and believe that how quick you want to go and how far you want to go is in the person, not what's in the bank account.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get that first project?
My first project was solely based on relationships. When I left the corporate world, a very comfortable world, I knew that the only way for me to get my first job was through someone that had already trusted me. So I literally went through my network of contacts. I went through my friends. I went through my family. And I was able to identify out of those contacts and individuals, who could I go to and ask for a project? I wasn't looking for an opportunity. I wanted a project. Like I mean, leaving that salary I had to not knowing where that first job was coming, I knew I just had to go for it. And if people had the faith and the trust in you on who you truly are, it's a very easy question to ask.
So, I mean, you keep kind of going back into the relationships.
Yeah.
You built how many years were you in the industry before you got into did your own thing?
I was about 8 years.
Okay, so you spent so it took you 8 years of building those relationships. So do you think that's a necessary need? It's not necessarily 8 years, but you need those relationships to back you, especially when you first get started.
You do, especially when you first get started. We can use trade contractors as an example. Let's use a flooring contractor. If there's a flooring contractor that's getting started out and they're working with another competitor in the industry, there's no track record, there's no history, and there's really no validation of what they can do. So ultimately, having people in your corner, to validate who you are. It might not even be their project, but just the support and people to validate you as a person and you as a company, it's extremely important. So, when I talk to people about starting their own businesses and mentoring them through the process, I tell them it's so critical to stay in alignment with people, treat them morally and ethically as if you would want to be treated. It goes back to the golden rule in life that our mothers always tell us: treat people the way you want to be treated. And it cannot be any more true than it is today. And so ultimately, yes, it comes back to relationships because they're so valuable and they're so important to where you never know when you have to go back to that person. Never burn the bridges, because even though construction is a big world, the network's very small. Yeah.
So you started when 5 years ago?
Actually, not even that. So I started the company in November 2017, but I did not go full time until August of 2018. So we'll be 4 years this coming August.
So you started 4 years ago. Now it's 2022.
Yep.
The industry has slightly changed, obviously, economics wise. Do you think it's wise to start a new company right at this time and nobody knows what's going on?
Yep. I think there's never a good time to do it. So some advice that I had got before I started my company was, Jesse, you only go around this thing once and that's all you get. The one thing we can never get back is time. So why not start now? Why not start tomorrow? There's a lot of people that have side hustles, and the side hustles ultimately can or cannot wind up into a business of their own. And so people, and I heard this on a podcast the other day, people work Monday through Friday on their primary job. Well, work after hours and on the weekend on your side hustles to make that now your full-time career. So I don't ever think it's a bad time to start. I think ultimately the people that are doubling down right now will be the ones that come out, and they will be the ones that are most successful down the road.
You said, I'm quitting the job before you got that deal, before you got that first job.
So great question. So I seen the writing on the wall when I had first gotten my general contractor's license. I was doing some things on the side. It was a side hustle, but I knew at some point the time would come. So I was, after hours on the weekends, I was working on how do I truly make this side hustle into a true career? How do I make this into something that could be something much bigger? And sitting here today, I never would imagine the company would be what it is today compared to what it was then. So I ultimately had projects lined up before I put in my notice and I left that career.
Really? Okay. So you did start it as a side hustle,
Yep.
just doing, fixing, kind of small
Yep.
houses or something. Were they kind of like doing like house flips? What was that kind of side hustle?
So it was a little bit of both. So it was all residential work. I was
Okay.
on residential remodels and mostly new construction, custom homes. And I was building those after hours and on the weekends.
Really? And the company that you were with, it was predominantly commercial, correct?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
So at that point in time, there was no conflict
Yeah.
of interest. And then really, it just boiled down to it's just not going to work.
So why did you choose? Why'd you choose to go back to commercial when you were doing so well residentially?
Relationships.
Really?
All my
Okay.
relationships were in the commercial world. That's what I had. That's what I was born with. That's what I came to know throughout my entire college and early in my career. When I graduated college, I went to work for the international construction manager. So I was building the $5 million to $200 million projects down in Orlando and Georgia and Gainesville and Sarasota and Tampa. So that's what I came from, and I knew I needed to get back into it. So ultimately, the custom homes residential was something that I knew I had to do to start establishing some capital for the company. So there was a strategic plan in there on let's start to establish some capital, let's get some money into the bank account, and then let's take this thing to the next level.
Okay. So then kind of hopping back onto the actual kind of point of the show is you build the relationships and then you launch. And so basically you built the relationships, you had a part-time, kind of gig, and you said, all right, I'm seeing this could be something. I jump into it.
Yep.
Break down how, kind of what you did, that very first month saying, I'm no longer working. Now I don't have 8 hours in my day. What do I do there?
Well, first of all, if anyone ever thinks they're going to start a business and they have an 8 to 5 schedule, you're wrong. I mean, we all know this as business owners. It's almost a 24/7 deal, especially when you first start out. The amount of hours you put in out of business can be very, very overwhelming. And ultimately, this is why we hear that 95% of businesses fail within the first 3 to 5 years. It's the pressure that gets to them. It's the stress, and it's the holy cow, I didn't realize I had to do all this. You're the IT person, you do marketing. So, there was a strategy in place when I left. And ultimately, I was loving on the relationships, and I had to be careful. I had to be careful in a way that I wasn't jeopardizing my relationship with my current employer, which we have a phenomenal relationship to this day. So once I left that firm, reaching out to the other individuals was a bit easier. So I didn't have a non-compete at that time, which ultimately was my saving grace. If there would have been a non-compete, I might not be as far along as I am now. So ultimately that did assist me in the process. But I was able to love in the relationships. And when I say love in the relationships, it's calling someone and asking, hey, how's the family doing? Let's go grab some lunch. Let's go golfing on a weekend. But be you. Be who you really are. Don't try to be someone you're not, because a fake person can be smelt a mile away. And it's the biggest turnoff when it comes to truly trying to establish your brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you kept in the relation. Okay. So it went 24/7 full time into everything.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to, I mean, essentially, basically, just what I'm trying to break it down to is saying, all right, you're saying, all right, I have these jobs that I'm going after, and you kind of have one network of jobs, which was residential.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, all right, I want to begin to go into the commercial. Yep. So basically, did you start getting on the phone and just calling every connection that you knew?
Okay. So what I did there, when I knew I needed to make the shift, and at some point I decided to say, okay, enough is enough of residential. And ultimately, I didn't just cut off residential. I gradually went into commercial. And the way I did about that was a few different things. The first one was I called on everyone I knew in the commercial market that was either a broker or a property manager, a developer, and I was trying to connect the dots with where I came from on the previous employer. So I used the name of a previous employer, a big name, to establish truly what my reputation was. And from there, I'd sit in my home office and I would print out my resumes and I would create PDFs as a company portfolio with my experience on projects. So I was leveraging my experience on these bigger projects with these bigger name clients that I knew these individuals knew of. If I was approaching a client in Tampa or a client in Live Oak, and I knew that Johnson & Johnson Vision Eye Care, it was a name they knew. They see it on television. They see it on big billboards. So I had to think of a way of that client. If I'm the client, why would I trust Jesse? Well, he's worked with Johnson & Johnson Vision Eye Care. He's worked with the city of Gainesville. He's worked with the city of Jacksonville. So
Okay, so you basically would just say, I've worked. You didn't say who you were under. You just said, I've worked with these companies before.
Yep. And you've got to be really careful about not using company property.
You have to kind of be in the gray area.
You have to be in the gray area. You have a right to say, I've worked on this project. I managed the project. It wasn't your project. So let's not get that wrong. But you managed the project.
Okay.
And ultimately, that's how I was able to build a reputable reputation with new clients that I have never worked with before. But I knew there were some opportunities.
So when did you begin to start subcontracting out work? So you went general contracting. Obviously, you weren't the one that was going in there to do everything yourself.
Right.
So basically, you said, all right, I think we got the job. And then basically begin to start putting pieces in place. First of all, did you put those pieces in place beforehand, or did you put them after you got the job?
It was so reactive, and I'm gonna be honest with you, it was very reactive. But the way I did about doing that, the way that I approached that, is coming from a big corporate world. They were extremely big trade contractors that I knew would not be interested in the work that I have. But if it was an individual that I worked with on a fire station, I would call Mike up, and Mike, hey, I'm looking at this exterior facade renovations in Live Oak. I know you guys don't do it, it's too small, but do you have a recommendation on who I could call? Again, back to relationships. If I didn't have that relationship, I wouldn't have had the recommendations. And ultimately, when we started out, I had to have a lower tier pool of trade contractors that didn't want to do the big work. They wanted to stay doing small work. So I had to establish that base and that foundation of these trade contractors. And as the projects grew, we started to attract bigger contractors. We started to attract bigger clients. And ultimately, we just kind of organically begin to build on each tier of the company.
So your line of work is obviously different from someone that wants to start their own electrician company, plumbing company, because basically they have a subset category.
Yeah.
So at that point, do you think it actually may be easier because if they've been in the electrical industry, well, at least for the first little bit, they can be the ones that are working on the actual project and everything. They don't have to be bringing in a bunch of different hands.
Yeah, so it ultimately really depends on where you want to go as a company. Like for me, I knew day one I wanted to be a general contractor. I didn't want to be hands-on. I didn't want to self-perform any work. And there's people out there that do a really good job at that. We're just not that person. But if we use an electrician, for example, the electrician doesn't have to sub out their work. They're going to self-perform it with their own hands and their own labor. But then again, we can talk as far as where we are with the labor market and other companies having to hire labor to come in because of the shortage in workers. So we see a lot of that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that I've kind of noticed that, especially when I was building my business. Basically, someone said, okay, you're either going to have to become known as the individual who is the top of the industry as this one person. And essentially you're still trading your time for money, and you can just bring that rate way up. And very similar to almost like a doctor, to where, okay, if he's the best doctor, in the world, so he can charge whatever he wants. It'd be kind of very similar to kind of something like that. Or you go the route of the actual company route, to where you really are behind the scenes. That most people probably will never necessarily meet you, that are kind of in it. But so even though, okay, you're not necessarily getting the recognition, it's not as ego boosting. You're going to be much more profitable on that end.
Yeah. So that's interesting because, when I started, I never really knew how to price jobs as an owner, because I've never been an owner before. So I wasn't sure how to really, what truly is my gross profit? What's my next? What's my net? What's my operating capital? I didn't know that going into it. So there's a lot of things that I learned, but ultimately as we built the company and I started to build a more valuable reputation, my time became more valuable. So I could increase prices. And it wasn't that we were making more money. I was finally starting to get back in line with what I felt like I was worth. Going from $150,000 to making $35,000 my first year. That's a culture shock. And it's, we pull back on our lifestyle a lot, but as the company started to build its brand and reputation, we began to be able to charge more because of the value we were establishing and bringing to the market.
Mm-hmm. So, and you basically essentially doubled in size every single year since then, correct?
Yeah, we have. So year one, from August to December, we did just under $700,000. The first full year, we did 2.6. The second full year, we did 7.8. Our third full year, we're going to do close to 30 million now.
Wow. So you jumped from 7.8 to 30 million.
Yep.
That first year, you said 2.8, correct?
Yep.
How did that break down job wise? Was it one big $1 million job and then some side projects, or how did that break down that first year?
I would say we did about 30 projects that year.
Okay.
30 projects from doing, let's say, a 1,200 square foot office renovation of carpet and paint, maybe some steel and tile work. It could have been a job like that, or it could have been a new coffee shop, not new construction. We didn't have our first new construction until last year as a company. So
you predominantly were strictly renovation.
We were all renovation work, and I think we had a couple of residentials we were still wrapping up because the whole crisis with COVID delayed so much stuff in the last couple of years. So we were wrapping those up. So ultimately, we fast forward where we are now. We went from one new construction last year of $1.6 million was the building cost to we got about, I'd say, we'll have about 18 million in new construction this year.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this is been all right.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah. I appreciate you giving some knowledge. You know, I'm a listener, so I'll be listening more.
Yeah, appreciate it. And really, and if I can leave with one note with anyone looking to start a business, I can't go back and say, look, it's never the right time. I had so many people tell me, if you're going to do it, do it. The hardest thing to do is always take that step forward. You don't have to have a plan. You just got to get moving in the right direction. It can be baby steps. It can be little steps. You don't have to compare yourself to where someone is that's been doing this for 20 years. And I was feeling on that when I started. I was always comparing myself to where I knew I could be and where I wanted to be, but not necessarily where I should be. So ultimately, it's just one step at a time, and it's baby steps. And before you know it, you go from having a revenue of 700,000 to 30 million, and the next year we'll do try to do 50 million. So this is ultimately it's all baby steps. So that wraps up today's episode of the Contractor Show. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time, and stay tuned. We're gonna be doing this every week, and we'll have more to come.
All right,
thank you.
Let's do it.